The wind cut through the canyon like a restless spirit, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the distant smoke of a lone campfire. For 15 long years, Kalen, a warrior of the Apache, had walked the lands like a shadow, silent and untouchable, untouched by the softness of human closeness. His eyes, dark and unwavering, had seen the horizon shift from the rolling plains to jagged mesas. But never had they met the warmth of a woman's gaze. The years had hardened him, carved his body and soul into a fortress of solitude, and the world had learned to respect the quiet strength he carried without question. His home was a small, rugged cabin built by his own hands, perched on a rise overlooking the valley below. Every log, every corner, every rough-hewn stone told a story of survival, of battles fought not only against men, but against the relentless loneliness that clung to him like a second skin. Even the horses he tended seemed to sense his solitude, their eyes reflecting a quiet understanding that words could never capture. Kalen was a man of few needs, fewer words, and no attachments. Yet in the deepest recess of his heart, a flicker of something long forgotten, shadow of yearning, lingered, though he would never admit it even to himself. The morning had begun like any other, with frost still clinging to the tips of the pines and the first hints of sunlight painting the mesas gold. Kalen had saddled his horse, a dark stallion named Thunder, and set out to check the traps he had laid along the creek. The world seemed at peace in that frozen stillness, untouched by the chaos of settlers and soldiers pressing into Apache lands. But peace, Kalen had learned, was often a fragile thing. That morning, a carriage appeared over the ridge, its wheels crunching over the frozen soil, sending birds into startled flight. It was unusual, for few ventured this far into his territory. Kalen dismounted and squinted, his hand instinctively resting on the bough he carried across his back. The figure in the carriage waved, a delicate motion that made his heart tighten without reason. She was dressed in fabrics unfamiliar to the plains, with a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders and eyes that seemed to hold a mixture of fear and curiosity. The moment their gazes met, something shifted in Kalen, something he had thought buried forever. You are not meant to be here," he said, his voice low, carrying the weight of authority but tinged with surprise. The woman's lips trembled as she tried to speak, her accent unfamiliar, foreign. I was told this was my home." Her voice broke on the last word, uncertain and fragile. Kalen studied her carefully. It was clear she was no threat, yet the confusion on her face stirred a strange protectiveness within him. For all his years of solitude, he had never encountered someone so utterly out of place, someone whose presence made the cold winds seem warmer, whose very breath hinted at life he had almost forgotten existed. "Who sent you?" he asked, though part of him already guessed. Mail-order brides were not unheard of in these territories, promises made on paper and exchanged with hopes that rarely matched reality. Yet this one, she was different. Her hands were small and deft, her posture hesitant but not weak. And her eyes held a fire that mirrored his own, a fire tempered by life's harsh lessons. My name is Alawan," she whispered. "I was supposed to, was promised to another, but the directions. I think there was a mistake." Kellen's jaw tightened. A mistake. He had heard stories of such things, but never imagined it would land on his doorstep, or more accurately, in the frozen soil of his home. He did not smile, had not smiled in years, and the lines on his face were proof enough of a life that had offered little joy. Yet in the silence that followed, something unspoken passed between them. A challenge, a question, a possibility neither dared voice. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of distant rain and the promise of spring. Alawan shivered and drew her shawl tighter around her, and without thinking, Kalen stepped closer, offering the warmth of his presence without a word. It was a gesture foreign to him, yet natural in its intent. The moment hung suspended, delicate as frost on a leaf, as though the world itself waited to see what would unfold. Eloan's gaze flickered toward the cabin, then back to Kalen. I don't mean to intrude," she said softly, almost apologetically. Yet in her tone, there was courage, a quiet defiance that both intrigued and unsettled him. Kalen finally nodded, his decision unspoken but understood. "You stay, for now. But no, this land does not forgive weakness." His voice was firm, unwavering, yet there was an edge of curiosity beneath the sternness. He led her toward the cabin, the snow crunching underfoot, and the air between them crackled with the tension of unsaid words. Inside, the cabin was warm, the hearth's fire painting the walls in flickering golden shadow. Kaelin gestured toward a chair, the silence between them thick, almost unbearable. Alawan hesitated, then sat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her presence filled the room in a way he had never expected. It was as though the space itself recognized the difference between emptiness and life. They spoke little that evening, the fire's glow illuminating Kellen's rough features and the softness of Eloan's delicate frame. And the world outside remained silent, the valley holding its breath as if aware of the shift in destiny. Kaelin, who had not known companionship for more than a decade, felt a stirring he could neither name nor suppress. A bridge between the harshness of his life and the fragility of human connection was forming, and the thought frightened him as much as it exhilarated him. As the night deepened, the wind's song outside the cabin mingled with the unspoken tension inside. Eloan's eyes reflected the firelight, and for the first time in 15 years, Kaelin felt the pull of something that was no longer just survival or duty. Something more. Something dangerous, yet irresistible. And then, as the clock ticked toward midnight, a shadow fell across the doorway. Neither had expected visitors. Outsiders rarely ventured into these lands, but the shadow suggested that the world beyond their fragile bubble had not forgotten Kaelin, nor the woman who had arrived by mistake. Kellen's hand went to the bow at his back, his senses sharp, but his eyes never left Eloan. She in turn rose slowly, courage and fear warring within her. The wind outside intensified, rattling the wooden frame of the cabin, and in that instant, both knew that their lives were about to change. The mail-order mistake had become the beginning of something neither could have anticipated. A story of longing, of fear, of passion held back for years was about to ignite. But before the first spark could truly catch fire, the shadow at the doorway shifted, and the faint sound of hooves on frozen ground reached their ears. Someone was coming. Kaelin tightened his grip, and Alawan swallowed hard, the reality of the wild frontier pressing in from all sides. And in that suspended, frozen moment, the air between them crackled not with anger, not with threat, but with the undeniable possibility of love, danger, and a future neither had imagined. The shadow at the doorway did not move closer immediately. It lingered, as if testing, weighing the cabin's defenses, measuring Kellen's silence against the stillness of the night. Alawan pressed closer to the warmth of the fire, feeling both fear and an unexplainable trust in the man whose eyes never left the doorway. Kellen's hand remained firm on his bow, his body coiled like a spring ready to release. The wind rattled the cabin again, carrying with it the faintest echo of hooves and the smell of wet earth. Someone had come through the frozen plains, and their presence was no accident. Kellen's mind, trained by years of survival in the harshest terrain, raced through possibilities. Raiders, soldiers, or worse, someone who had learned of him, of the Apache who had avoided the encroachment of the world for more than a decade. He could hear the soft breaths of Eloan, steady yet trembling, and he realized that her fear was mingling with curiosity, a reflection of the very tension he felt himself. "Alawan," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "stay near the fire. Do not move unless I tell you." She nodded, her lips pale but her resolve visible. Her eyes held something Kaelin hadn't seen in years, a spark that dared him to believe the world still held moments worth stepping into. The shadow shifted, revealing a man on horseback. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his coat was streaked with mud and snow. The horse stamped impatiently, ears twitching. The man's face was hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat, but the stance was confident, almost arrogant. Kaelin felt the familiar warning of danger, the kind that had saved his life countless times on these lands. But there was something else, something in the way the stranger's eyes caught the firelight that hinted at knowledge, as if he had come seeking more than a mere cabin. The wind carried voices, low and indistinct, and Kaelin realized the man was calling for someone, perhaps more than one. A chill ran down his spine as the first flakes of snow began to fall, coating the ground outside in white silence. Eloan's hand brushed against his sleeve, light and unsteady, and he caught it. A grounding touch that reminded him of the fragile humanity he had long forsaken. "Who are you?" Kaelin demanded, stepping forward, his shadow stretching across the cabin floor. The stranger tipped his hat back slightly, and a grin curved his lips, revealing teeth sharpened by a life spent on the edge. "Name's Thorn," he said, his voice carrying authority and danger in equal measure. "I hear there's someone hiding out here who might have something I want." Kellen's eyes narrowed. "You speak of property or of lives?" His tone was calm, but the tension in the room coiled like a rattlesnake. Thorn chuckled, a sound that was both charming and menacing. "A little of both, maybe. Depends on how cooperative you are." He glanced at Eloan, and Kalen felt a surge of protective instinct. He stepped between them, bow raised, the firelight glinting on the polished wood. Lowen's breath caught, but she did not retreat. For years, Kalen had lived with no one but the land and the wind. Every sunrise had brought repetition. Hunt, tend, survive. His life was simple, brutal, and unyielding. Yet now, with Eloan in the cabin, warmth touched corners of him he had thought permanently frozen. Her presence was a challenge, a reminder that life could offer more than survival, that moments of beauty and connection existed even in the wilderness. He thought of her small hands resting on the edge of the table, of the way her eyes had widened at the first glimpse of snow falling from the sky. So different from anything she had known. In that, he saw a reflection of his own lost humanity, and for a fleeting second, wondered what it might be like to let someone close, not just in body, but in spirit. Eloan, meanwhile, was discovering the resilience she hadn't known she possessed. She had left a life of comfort and safety, sent across the country to meet a stranger, and now found herself in the unforgiving frontier. Every sound, every movement carried the weight of danger, yet there was also wonder. The way Kalen moved through the cabin, the deliberate care with which he checked locks and windows, spoke of strength born from survival. She realized that beneath his stoic exterior lay a depth of honor and loyalty that few could match. Outside, thorns shifted, and the sound of his horse's hooves was like a drumbeat against the snow. Kalen listened, silent and precise, calculating distance and angle. "You should leave," he said, voice firm. "This land is not yours to claim. Not today, not ever." Thorn's grin widened. "Bold. I like that. But boldness doesn't always save you." He dismounted slowly, boots crunching against the frost, and Kalen could see the glint of a knife at his belt. The tension in the air was palpable, a taut string stretched between life and danger. Eloan instinctively stepped closer to Kalen, seeking safety in his shadow. Kellen's mind flashed to the past traps he had set, lessons from his father, lessons from battles long forgotten. He had survived because he trusted instinct, because he respected the land, because he feared nothing that could not be measured and met with courage. And yet, Thorn was different. He was unpredictable, dangerous, and clever. The kind of man who could exploit a single misstep, a single hesitation. For a moment, time slowed. The snow fell thicker, coating the roof and shaking loose from the trees above. Inside the cabin, the fire flickered, casting shadows that danced across the rough-hewn walls. Kellen's gaze flicked to Eloan, and he caught the unspoken question in her eyes. "Can we survive this together?" The answer was not yet clear, but the thought of losing her, of letting danger claim her, was unbearable. Thorn took another step forward, and Kalen readied himself. He could feel the tension in his muscles, the familiar adrenaline that sharpened every sense. He knew he would fight if he had to, but the wildness of the situation demanded more than brute strength. It demanded cunning, patience, and strategy. And for the first time in 15 years, Kalen realized that he might not have to face this challenge alone. Eloan swallowed hard, drawing courage from the quiet strength radiating from the man beside her. Her journey had brought her to the edge of fear, but also to the edge of something new, something dangerous and thrilling. She did not yet know how this night would end, or if the fragile bridge of trust between them could withstand the storm outside. All she knew was that in Kellen's presence, the wilderness felt alive in a way it had never been before, filled with possibilities she had only dreamed of. Outside, Thorn's hand lingered near the knife at his belt, and Kellen's eyes narrowed. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying with it the distant call of wolves, the scent of snow, and the unspoken promise of conflict. The cabin felt smaller, more vulnerable, yet also more alive, charged with anticipation. Every heartbeat seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. Every flicker of firelight a reminder that danger and desire often walked hand in hand. Kalen drew a slow breath, feeling the weight of years of solitude, of lessons learned the hard way. and as Thorn stepped fully into the firelight, revealing a face both weathered and cunning, Kalen realized that this night would not end quietly. Lawan, standing beside him, felt the same shiver of anticipation, a mixture of fear and fascination. In that instant, the wilderness outside became more than a backdrop. It became a participant in their story, a witness to the beginnings of something neither could yet name, but both would feel forever. And just as the first words of confrontation passed between them, a sharp crack echoed from the ridge above, startling even the seasoned Kalen. Rocks shifted, the sound of movement carried down the canyon, and both he and Alawan knew without question that the night had only just begun. Danger was approaching from more than one direction. The fragile thread holding their temporary sanctuary together threatened to snap. In the flickering firelight, Kalen and Alawan stood side by side, strangers brought together by fate, by mistake, and by an unspoken attraction neither could deny. Outside, the world pressed in with its cold and its cruelty. Inside, their hearts beat in. Quiet synchronization, aware of the peril, aware of the desire, aware that everything could change in a heartbeat. The snow fell heavier now, masking sounds and shadows, as if the wilderness itself conspired to heighten every emotion, every instinct. And in that frozen, fragile balance, Kalen realized that the story of his life, the story of a warrior untouched for 15 years, was about to collide with something he had long thought impossible: love, danger, and the unpredictable journey of trust and survival. The snow fell heavier now, coating the canyon and muffling sound, making every creak of the cabin, every distant hoofbeat, feel amplified. Kalen stood at the window, his eyes narrowed, scanning the ridge where the sharp shape of Thorn's horse had disappeared into the whiteness. His instincts screamed that danger was coming, that Thorn was not alone, that the night would test them both in ways the wilderness alone never could. Elawan moved behind him, her hand brushing against his back as if seeking reassurance, though Kalen was the one who drew strength from her presence. "Do you think he brought others?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howl of the wind. Kalen didn't answer immediately. Years of experience told him that fear was both enemy and ally. It sharpened perception, but it could cloud judgment. "Possibly," he said finally. "And if he did, we cannot rely on chance." Every shadow could be a threat. Every sound could be a warning. Outside, the canyon seemed to hold its breath, the wind carrying whispers of movement, the faint crunch of snow beneath boots that were not human, or at least not alone. Kalen knew that to survive, he would have to think beyond the cabin walls. The land itself was his ally, and he had long ago learned how to read its subtle signs: the break of a branch, the disturbed snow, the faint imprint of a boot or hoof. Alawan shivered, partly from cold, partly from anticipation. She had survived hardship before leaving her family, traveling across unknown territory, facing the uncertainty of this frontier, but this was unlike anything she had imagined. Every instinct screamed danger, yet alongside that fear was a thrill she did not fully understand. In Kellen's presence, danger became intimate, almost personal, and she realized that the line between terror and trust was thinner than she had ever known. Kalen turned, his dark eyes locking on hers. "Stay close. Move when I tell you. Watch, listen, but do not act unless necessary." He could see the determination in her face, and it stirred something deep within him, a mixture of admiration and something he had buried for years of ire. For 15 years, no woman had touched his life. No voice had softened the edges of his existence. In the shadow of Thorn's arrival, Elawan represented more than life or survival. She was the spark in a world long darkened by solitude. The hours stretched. Outside, the wind carried the faint sounds of men moving through the snow, careful, deliberate, but not silent enough for Kalen to be fooled. He had seen the patterns of hunters, raiders, and soldiers, and each had a tell. These men were calculated, but Thorn's voice had betrayed arrogance. He underestimated the land and the warrior who had mastered it. As the night deepened, Kalen devised a plan. He moved quietly through the cabin, gathering supplies, checking the fire, and ensuring escape routes were ready. He whispered instructions to Aloan, her soft voice echoing back questions and observations that revealed her sharp mind, her ability to adapt, her courage. "We can use the ridge," Kalen said. "The snow will cover our tracks." It won't expect us to move until we need to. Ilawan nodded, her fingers brushing the coarse wool of his jacket, and Kaelin felt the stirrings of something more than survival between them. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable, a connection forged under pressure, intensified by the knowledge that each heartbeat could be the last if missteps were made. Outside, Thorn and his companions circled the ridge. Their voices were low, but Kaelin could pick up fragments, talk of claim, of gold, of revenge. H painted a picture of men driven not by reason but by greed, ambition, and a need to dominate. Kaelin knew that confronting them directly could be fatal. Subterfuge, patience, and cunning would be the key. But patience required trust, and trust was something Kaelin had not offered freely for years. Ilawan, meanwhile, was learning the harsh lessons of frontier life in real time. She helped Kaelin prepare traps, listened for changes in the wind, observed footprints, and even learned to recognize the subtle shift of snow indicating approaching danger. Odd in doing so, she began to feel a sense of purpose beyond the passive role she had expected when leaving home. She was no longer just a visitor, no longer merely the accidental bride. In the wilderness, alongside Kaelin, she became part of the land's rhythm, part of its defense, part of its heartbeat. Hours passed. The snowstorm outside intensified, reducing visibility and muffling sound. Kaelin and Ilawan moved like shadows themselves, checking traps, adjusting their positions, communicating with gestures rather than words. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken feelings, a mutual recognition of what had been, lost in the past, and what might be gained if they survived this night. Suddenly, a faint clatter echoed from the outer ridge. Kaelin froze, hand on the bow, body taut. Ilawan's breath caught, and instinctively she pressed against him, feeling the warmth of his body, the steadying presence of a man who had faced countless dangers and emerged unscathed. The sound repeated, closer now, deliberate. Someone was testing the perimeter, probing for weakness. Kaelin whispered instructions, and they moved silently toward the window, watching as a shadowy figure crept closer. It was one of Thorn's men, cautious but curious, unaware that the land itself favored those who respected it. Kellen's mind worked quickly, mapping angles, estimating movement, calculating risk. You could strike, but patience was safer. You could let them make a mistake, reveal themselves, and only then act. Ilawan's hand found his again, gripping lightly, a signal of solidarity. Her presence calmed him, even as his instincts screamed danger. The juxtaposition of fear and desire was sharp, almost intoxicating. In the wilderness, with life hanging in the balance, every glance, every touch, became charged with significance. Meanwhile, Thorn had returned to the ridge, unaware that his men were being silently observed. His arrogance was palpable, his overconfidence, the kind that could undo even the cleverest plans. Kaelin noted the patterns, the rhythm of the intruders, and quietly adjusted the cabin's defenses. Every trap, every precaution, every strategy was designed not just to survive, but to protect Ilawan, the woman who had inadvertently stirred a part of him long dormant. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity. Outside, the wind howled and the snow piled higher, obscuring movement, transforming the landscape into a shifting maze of white. Inside, Kaelin and Ilawan shared quiet moments, brief exchanges of words, subtle gestures of connection. A glance, a touch of a hand, a shared breaths, small intimacies that, in the harsh world outside, carried more weight than any declaration of love could. Then, just as Kaelin began to feel a sliver of hope that the night might pass without confrontation, a loud crack echoed through the ridge. Snow tumbled from a nearby tree, and Kellen's senses screamed danger. Thorn was closer than expected, and his men were moving with purpose. The cabin, once a haven, became a trap. Escape would require cunning, speed, and an unbreakable trust between the warrior and the woman who had arrived by mistake. Ilawan's eyes met Kellen's, wide with fear, but alight with determination. In that moment, they both knew that whatever happened next, the night would change them forever. The snowstorm, the canyon, the intruders, everything pressed in on them. But so did the undeniable pull of something more than survival, something neither of them had fully named, but both could feel: connection, desire, and the fragile hope that love could survive even the most merciless frontier. Kellen's hand tightened on the bow, eyes scanning the ridge one last time. Eluan's fingers brushed his, grounding them both. The storm outside raged, the unknown waited in the shadows, and the first move of the night's deadly game was about to unfold. The wind shrieked through the canyon, carrying snow and stabbing gusts that stung the skin and blurred the edges of the world outside. Inside the cabin, Kellen's eyes never left the shadows beyond the frost-covered window. Every creak of the timber, every whisper of movement through the snow, made his muscles coil like steel. Thorn and his men were close, no longer testing, but moving with purpose. And Kalen knew that tonight, the safety of his home and the fragile trust he had built with Alawan hung by a single thread. Alawan moved silently behind him, a bundle of nervous energy and quiet determination. "Kalen," she whispered, her voice almost swallowed by the howl of the storm. "What if there are more of them than you think?" Kellen's jaw tightened. "Then we will use the land to our advantage. Patience is as deadly as any weapon." He glanced at her, the firelight highlighting her delicate features, the resolve in her eyes. And a flicker of emotion stirred within him, something older than survival, something that had slept through 15 long years of solitude. She had arrived by mistake, yet now every instinct in him urged him to keep her safe, to claim a part of this life for her, for both of them. Outside, the snow shifted, as if stirred by invisible hands. Kalen caught the faintest scent of horses, the subtle movement of men testing the perimeter, and he knew that Thorn had split his forces. One group would approach from the ridge, another from the creek below. They were clever, but the land had taught Kalen lessons that no greed or cunning could overcome. He motioned for Alawan to follow, guiding her to the far side of the cabin where a trap he had set days ago waited. Her fingers brushed against his arm as they moved, and Kalen felt a warmth he had not known for more than a decade. "This is your first real night in the wilderness," he murmured, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Not the kind they prepare you for in letters or dreams." Alawan's lips curved in a faint, tense smile. "I think I've learned more in a few hours than in my entire life before." Her gaze met his, and in the flickering firelight a silent understanding passed between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. A sudden shadow at the window made both of them freeze. One of Thorn's men, bold or careless, had approached too close. Kalen raised his bow, the tension in the string coiling like a snake ready to strike. He whispered, "Wait. Let him reveal himself." The figure paused, hands raised slightly. And Kalen noted the pattern of movement, hesitation betraying fear, fear betraying experience. With a sudden pull of the string, Kalen sent the arrow through the cold air. It struck the snow near the man's feet, a warning rather than a kill. The intruder stumbled backward, cursing under his breath, and Kalen felt the thrill of control tighten his chest. Alawan exhaled quietly, her fingers still lightly pressed against his arm, and in that contact, he found resolve stronger than any weapon he possessed. Time seemed suspended. The storm raged. The canyon echoed with distant hooves and the occasional shout, and inside the cabin, every breath was measured, every movement deliberate. Thorn's voice rang out from the ridge, low and commanding. "Search every inch. They cannot hide from me forever." His arrogance and certainty cut through the wind like a blade, but Kalen knew that overconfidence could be fatal. Thorn underestimated both the land and the warrior who had survived it for years. Alawan helped silently, moving with careful precision, resetting small traps, observing patterns, and even reading subtle signs of the intruder's movement. She had learned quickly, faster than Kalen had expected, and her courage impressed him. In her, he saw more than a companion or a mistake. He saw a partner. Someone who could share both the dangers and the rare beauty of life in the wild. Suddenly, a shout erupted from the creek below. One of Thorn's men had stumbled into a trap, the snow and rope tangling him in a mess of his own making. The sound carried, echoing through the canyon, and Kalen recognized the advantage. He whispered to Alawan, "We draw them toward the traps. Let the land fight for us." She nodded, a flicker of excitement in her eyes, despite the danger, and together they moved silently, preparing the final lines of defense. The night stretched on, each moment heavier with suspense. Thorn approached from the ridge, his figure looming larger against the swirling snow. Kellen's bow was drawn, every arrow a promise of precision and skill. His heart raced, not just with fear or strategy, but with the electricity of having Alawan beside him, her presence a tether to something he had long abandoned: hope, desire, and the fragile possibility of love. Then, a sudden crack, a tree limb breaking underway, code through the storm. Thorn paused, hand reaching for the knife at his belt. Kellen's eyes flicked to Alawan, and she understood without words. They would face this moment together. Every sense was sharpened, every heartbeat synced to the rhythm of survival and anticipation. Thorn advanced, unaware that the snow had concealed several hidden pitfalls. The first trap caught his horse, throwing it off balance and sending a cloud of snow into the air. Thorn stumbled, and Kellen's breath caught not in triumph, but in the intense awareness of how quickly the balance between life and danger could shift. Ilawan's hand brushed his shoulder, grounding him, reminding him that they were no longer alone in the wilderness, no longer separate from the human connections that gave life its meaning. The other men approached cautiously, aware that traps lay hidden, aware that the land itself seemed hostile. Kalen and Alawan moved as one, silent, precise, a living shadow of strategy and instinct. Every step they took, every arrow they knocked, every movement drew the intruders deeper into the advantage that only knowledge of the land could provide. Despite the tension, a quiet intimacy grew between them. Lowen's fingers brushed against Kellen's as they repositioned, a spark of warmth against the cold, harsh air. Their eyes met in fleeting moments, and each time, unspoken words passed between them. Survival, trust, and something deeper, more dangerous, and more beautiful than either had expected. The wind roared, snow whipped against the cabin walls, and yet the silence between Kalen and Alawan was filled with electricity. Danger pressed from outside, but within, the connection between them grew stronger. It was a bond forged not by comfort, but by the fire of shared peril, by the intimacy of reliance, and by the quiet knowledge that the night would test everything they held dear. And then, a scream pierced the storm. Thorn, caught off guard by another hidden trap, his arrogance shattered for a moment. Kellen's bow was drawn, ready for anything, his mind calculating, heart pounding. Alawan pressed close, her warmth and courage anchoring him. And together they prepared for the final approach of the men who had come to claim what was not theirs. Every sense was alive, every heartbeat measured, every glance and gesture filled with anticipation. The snowstorm outside, the hidden traps, Thorn's men, the looming ridge all pressed on them, creating a tension so intense it seemed to stretch time itself. Kalen and Alawan stood together, shadows in the firelight, warriors in their own right, bound by circumstance and the fragile beginnings of something neither had expected: love, connection, and the possibility that survival was not just about endurance, but about fighting for each other. The night had reached its peak. Every step, every sound, every whisper of wind carried the promise of confrontation. The world outside pressed in with cold and danger, but inside the cabin, the warmth of trust, the spark of desire, and the unspoken bond between Kalen and Ilawan made the storm feel almost bearable. And as Thorn and his remaining men prepared for the final push, the two of them knew that the next moments would determine everything: life, love, and the fragile hope of a future together. The storm began to ease, the wind shifting from a fierce howl to a softer whisper, as if the canyon itself was holding its breath, waiting to see the outcome of the night's chaos. Kalen stood at the cabin door, bow in hand, watching the remnants of Thorn's men retreat into the snow. Their arrogance had faltered under the weight of the traps, the unforgiving land, and Kellen's precise strategy. One by one, they had scattered, stumbling through the deep snow, leaving only silence and the faint smell of fear in the air. Alawan moved to his side, brushing snowflakes from his shoulders, her hands lingering longer than necessary. Kellen's gaze softened as he looked at her. In the firelight that still flickered through the cabin, she looked radiant, more alive than he had ever imagined a person could appear in the frozen wilderness. The danger was over, at least for now, and yet the adrenaline and fear of the past hours lingered, leaving them both breathless in more ways than one. Kalen lowered his bow, exhaling slowly. "They won't return tonight," he said, his voice steady but quiet. They know now that this land is not theirs to take. He glanced at Eloan, a flicker of something almost shy crossing his features, a softness he rarely allowed anyone to see. And neither of us will let them. Eloan smiled, the tension leaving her shoulders. I never thought I'd survive the first night, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly with relief and exhilaration. But with you, I feel like we can survive anything. Her words were simple, but they carried weight heavier than snow-laden branches, heavier than any threat that had come down the canyon. Kalen felt it in his chest, a stirring of something long buried beneath years of solitude and survival. The fire in the cabin crackled, filling the quiet space with warmth and light. Kalen moved to stoke it, and Eloan helped, their hands brushing against each other in a touch that was both intimate and natural. For the first time in 15 years, Kalen allowed himself to feel more than duty or survival. He allowed himself to feel hope, to feel love. They sat close by the fire, sharing a quiet meal from the provisions Kalen had stored, the simple act of eating together taking on a significance it never would have before. The world outside was harsh and cold, but inside, warmth radiated not only from the flames, but from the closeness they shared. Eloan laughed softly at a story Kalen told of a time he had narrowly escaped a wildcat years before. The sound was pure and clear, and Kalen found himself smiling, an expression he hadn't worn in years. Hours passed, and the storm outside faded into a gentle snowfall. Kalen stepped outside for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, and felt the land stretch out before him in quiet majesty. The valley was serene now, untouched, except by the marks he had made in defending it. The silence carried a promise. Life could continue here, free from those who sought to disrupt it, but only if they respected it and each other. Eloan joined him, her hand finding his. They stood together on the small rise, looking down at the frozen valley below. "It's beautiful," she whispered, awe in her voice. "Even after everything." Her gaze met his, full of trust and wonder, and Kalen felt the final remnants of his loneliness slip away, replaced by a certainty he had never known. "We'll be safe here," Kalen said softly, "as long as we respect the land and each other." His voice carried a firmness born of experience, but also a gentleness reserved only for her. He turned to look at her fully, their faces inches apart. "And as long as we stay together," Eloan's eyes softened, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The fear, the danger, the snow, all of it, faded into the background, leaving only the warmth between them. She pressed closer, and Kalen, who had not allowed himself intimacy in so many years, let the connection flow naturally. Their hands intertwined, fingers laced, and the quiet comfort of touch spoke louder than any words could. The next morning dawned clear and bright. The storm had passed completely, leaving the valley sparkling under the first light of sun. Kalen and Eloan stepped outside, surveying the damage and the traps that had defended their home. It was a harsh reminder of the night's dangers, but also a testament to their resilience. They had survived together, and in surviving, had forged a bond stronger than fear or isolation. Kalen led Eloan to the creek, where the snow had melted slightly, and the water ran freely. It sounded soothing after the tension of the previous night. They watched the reflection of the sun on the water, the sparkling light dancing like hope across the valley. "This land has given me everything I need," Kalen said quietly. "But it's you who has reminded me there's more to life than survival." Eloan smiled, the warmth in her eyes reflecting the sunlight. "And you've reminded me what it means to be brave, to fight, and to trust," she said softly. "Not just in others, but in myself." Their shared glance held meaning, a quiet promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. In the days that followed, they worked to repair the cabin, to secure the perimeter, and to settle into a new rhythm of life together. The land, once only a place of survival for Kalen, became a home filled with laughter, conversation, and the soft glow of companionship. Eloan learned to ride with skill, to read the subtle cues of the land, and to anticipate danger with a calm intuition. Kalen taught her the ways of the wilderness, and in return, she brought light to his life in ways he had never imagined possible. The threat of Thorn and his men faded with time, the story of their defeat spreading quietly through the valleys. Kalen and Eloan knew that the peace they had won was fragile, but it was theirs. And in that shared triumph they found joy, trust, and a love neither had anticipated when fate had thrown them together by mistake. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mesas, painting the sky with gold and crimson, Kalin and Alawan sat together outside the cabin. The horses grazed quietly nearby, the wind was gentle, and the valley lay in serene silence. Kalin took Eloan's hand in his, holding it firmly. "We have survived the worst," he said, his voice steady, "and now we can build something better, together." Alawan leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady strength of his presence. Together she echoed, the word a quiet affirmation of the bond they had forged in danger, trust, and shared discovery. The sun dipped fully behind the mesas, and a soft peace settled over the valley. Kalin and Alawan sat together in the fading light, knowing that the storms, the dangers, and the challenges of the frontier would come again, but also knowing that together they could face anything. Their story, once defined by solitude and mistakes, had become one of love, trust, and survival, a testament to the power of connection, courage, and the unexpected turns life could take. And as the stars emerged one by one over the canyon, reflecting off the snow and the frozen river, Kalin and Alawan shared a quiet, knowing smile. The wilderness was vast and unpredictable, but in each other they had found a home, a companion, and the promise of a future filled with possibility. The night was calm, the valley safe, and the warmth of their bond stronger than ever. In the heart of the unforgiving land, the lonely Apache warrior and the woman who had arrived by mistake discovered not only survival, but love, trust, and the rare unshakable peace that comes from facing the world together. Their story, marked by danger and desire, hardship and hope, had reached its natural conclusion not with the chaos of the storm, but with the quiet certainty of hearts that had found each other finally in the wild. And in that quiet valley, under the glow of the stars and the soft whisper of the wind through the pines, Kalin and Alawan knew that they had survived more than danger. They had discovered life, love, and the enduring promise of togetherness.